The wind was cold that morning, and the little girl's hands were trembling as she clutched a small velvet pouch. Inside it was her mother's ring, the only thing left from a happier time. The streets were quiet, dust floating in the air, and her empty stomach growled louder than her thoughts. She looked around the marketplace, her eyes searching for someone, anyone, who might stop and listen. But people walked past her as if she was invisible. To them, she was just another poor child with dirt on her face and fear in her eyes. Her mother sat nearby, weak and pale, wrapped in an old blanket. It had been 2 days since they'd eaten anything. The little girl couldn't stand watching her mother's hands shake anymore. That's why she brought the ring. It wasn't hers to sell, but she didn't care. Hunger didn't wait for permission. She held the ring tightly and whispered to herself, "Just one meal. That's all we need." Her eyes filled with tears as she stepped forward, trying to find the courage to speak to strangers. Every step felt heavy. Every look she received felt colder than the wind. She didn't know that her small act of desperation would soon change both their lives forever. Across the street, a man was tying his horse. His hat shaded his eyes and his boots left deep prints in the dirt. He looked like someone who didn't belong there: clean clothes, calm expression, quiet strength. The townspeople knew him as a wealthy ranch owner who rarely came to town. But today, for some reason, he noticed the little girl standing alone with something shiny in her hand. The girl tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. She approached a stall and asked the shopkeeper, "Would you buy this ring?" The man glanced at her, shook his head, and turned away. Her heart sank. She tried again, then again, but each time she was met with rejection. Her hope began to fade. The ring slipped from her tiny fingers, landing softly in the dirt. She bent down to pick it up, her eyes blurring from tears. And that was the moment the cowboy stepped closer, his shadow falling across the ground beside her. The little girl's name was Emily. She was only 8 years old, but the world had already taught her what hunger felt like. Not the kind that came between meals, the kind that made her dizzy, weak, and afraid to sleep because her stomach hurt too much. Her mother, Mary, had tried everything to keep them going. She cleaned houses when she could, washed clothes for a few coins, and even begged the local baker to let her sweep his shop just to earn a piece of bread. But lately, there had been no work. The cold season had come early, and with it, the silence of empty cupboards and long nights. Mary wasn't always like this. Once, she was strong and full of laughter. She used to hum while cooking and tell Emily stories about her father, a kind man who died years ago in an accident at the ranch where he worked. The ring Emily carried had belonged to him. It was her mother's wedding ring, simple but beautiful. Mary had promised never to part with it. It was all she had left of him. But promises start to feel heavy when your child's ribs begin to show. That morning, when Emily told her mother she would go into town, Mary tried to stop her. "No, Emily," she said softly. "We'll find another way." But her voice trembled and her eyes betrayed her fear. Emily had never seen her mother cry like that before. It was as if the strong woman who had always held her was fading into a shadow of herself. So, Emily kissed her mother's cheek, tucked the ring into her pocket, and whispered, "I'll bring something back." Then she ran before her mother could stop her. The town was a few miles away. Emily walked barefoot, the ground rough beneath her feet, but she didn't complain. Each step carried her closer to hope, or at least she told herself that. When she reached the edge of town, she saw the market was already alive. People shouted prices, horses snorted, and wagons rolled over the dirt road. The smell of food filled the air: roasted corn, baked bread, fresh meat sizzling on open fires. Her stomach twisted painfully, but she tried to focus. She held the ring tightly in her palm, afraid someone might snatch it away. It glimmered faintly in the morning light, catching the attention of no one but her. She approached a jewelry stall first. The man behind it was polishing a golden chain, his thick fingers moving quickly. Emily hesitated, then held out her hand. "Sir, would you buy this?" she asked softly. The man didn't even look up. "No trades from children," he muttered. She tried again, her voice shaking. "Please, sir, I need food. My mama, before she could finish, the man snapped. I said no. Go on, get out of here. Her face burned with shame. She turned away quickly, clutching the ring to her chest. She tried another stall, then another. No one would listen. A few people even told her to stop lying, thinking she had stolen it. The rejection hurt more than her hunger. For the first time, Emily wondered if she had made a mistake. Meanwhile, Mary sat by the window of their small shack, staring at the road. She wanted to believe Emily would come back soon, but a heavy feeling in her chest told her something was wrong. Her hands trembled as she whispered a prayer not for herself, but for her little girl's safety. Back in town, Emily found a quiet corner near the well and sat down. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. Around her, life went on, people laughing, trading, living. But for her, the world had shrunk to that one ring in her hand and the thought of her mother waiting. She turned the ring over and over, tracing the smooth metal, remembering the stories her mother used to tell about her father, how he bought it the day before their wedding, how he promised it would always remind her of love. Emily didn't want to lose that, but love didn't fill empty stomachs. She stood again, wiped her face, and walked toward one last stall, a food vendor. The smell of warm bread made her mouth water. She looked up at the woman selling it and whispered, "Ma'am, I can give you this ring. Can I have some food, please?" The woman glanced at her, then at the ring, and frowned. "Where did you get that?" she asked sharply. "It's my mama's," Emily said. "She's sick, we haven't eaten." The woman sighed and shook her head. "Go home, child, you shouldn't be here." Emily turned away slowly. The world felt colder now. She didn't even notice the tall man standing a few steps behind her, watching quietly. His name was Samuel, a rancher, known around the county for his wealth but also his solitude. He'd come to town to buy supplies, not to get involved in anyone's life. But something about the little girl caught his eye. Maybe it was the way she stood, shoulders small but determined, face pale but brave. Maybe it reminded him of someone he once knew. He watched her move from stall to stall, her voice getting smaller each time, her hope fading. Then he saw her trip, the ring slipping from her hand and landing in the dirt. He saw her kneel, brushing the dust away, whispering something he couldn't hear. That was when his chest tightened. He'd seen people down on their luck before, but something about this scene hit him harder than he expected. Samuel walked closer, his boots crunching softly on the ground. People glanced his way, they always did when he passed, but he barely noticed. His eyes were on the little girl. He could tell she wasn't begging for pity, she was fighting for someone she loved. He remembered a time long ago when his own mother had done the same for him. Maybe that's why he stopped. Maybe that's why he couldn't just walk away. The girl didn't look up at first. She only saw the shadow fall beside her, long and steady. She thought it was another person coming to turn her away. But then she heard a gentle voice say, "That's a fine ring you've got there." Her fingers tightened around it, unsure if she should answer. She looked up slowly and saw the man, tall, wearing a brown hat, eyes kind but serious. She didn't know it yet, but that moment, that quiet exchange of glances, was about to change everything she and her mother ever knew. Emily froze. The voice was calm but deep, with the kind of warmth that could make even cold air pause for a second. She looked up and saw the man's face clearly now, tanned skin, sharp features, and eyes that carried both kindness and strength. His hat shadowed part of his face, but she could tell he wasn't like the others who had brushed her off. Still, her fingers tightened around the ring as if it might disappear if she let go. Samuel crouched down to her level, careful not to startle her. "You're out here all by yourself?" he asked. Emily nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mama's sick. We don't have any food left." Her eyes darted to the ground, as if ashamed of saying it aloud. Samuel studied her for a moment. There was honesty in her trembling voice, the kind that couldn't be faked. He had seen desperation before, but this was different. This was innocence clinging to survival. He looked at the small ring in her palm. It wasn't much, plain gold with a faded engraving on the inside. "You're trying to sell this?" he asked gently. Emily nodded again. "It's my mama's ring," she said softly. "She said I shouldn't, but we're so hungry." Her words broke in the middle and she bit her lip to stop it from trembling. Samuel's chest tightened. He reached out but stopped halfway, not wanting to scare her. "How long since you've eaten?" he asked. Emily's shoulders lifted in a small shrug. "2 days, maybe 3. Mama says she's fine, but I can tell she isn't." The marketplace noise seemed to fade around them. People walked past, unaware of the quiet moment unfolding between a stranger and a starving child. Samuel sighed, removing his hat for a second and running his hand through his hair. He looked at the ring again. "I'll tell you what," he said, his voice steady. "I'll buy it." Emily's eyes widened, a flicker of hope sparking behind the dirt and tears. "Really?" she whispered. He nodded. "But not for the reason you think." He stood up and reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a few coins. "Take this," he said, pressing them into her tiny hand. "Get yourself and your mama something to eat. Then take me to her." Emily hesitated, confused. No one had ever offered her anything without taking something in return. "You don't want the ring?" she asked. Samuel smiled faintly. "Not yet. I want to meet the woman who raised a girl brave enough to sell something that precious." His tone was soft, almost fatherly. Emily didn't know how to respond, but something in his eyes told her she could trust him. Together they walked through the busy street. People turned to watch, the wealthy rancher and the barefoot child. Emily clutched the coins tightly, afraid she might wake up and find it all gone. Samuel walked beside her, silent, but his thoughts were loud. He'd built his life on hard work and discipline, but moments like this reminded him of things he'd forgotten. Compassion, connection, the quiet power of helping someone without being asked. They stopped at a small bakery. Samuel handed the baker a few more coins and nodded toward Emily. "Give her what she wants," he said. The baker, recognizing Samuel, didn't question it. Emily stared at the rows of bread, her eyes wide. She chose the smallest loaf she could find, afraid of taking too much. Samuel frowned. "Get another one," he said gently. She hesitated, then picked a second loaf, holding both to her chest as if they were made of gold. They continued walking. The town faded behind them as they followed the dirt path leading to the outskirts. The sky was starting to dim, painted with streaks of orange and pink. Emily walked faster now, excited to bring the food back to her mother. Her feet hurt, but she didn't care. For the first time in days, hope felt real. Samuel followed a few steps behind, the sound of his boots steady against the ground. When they reached the small shack at the edge of the woods, Samuel's heart sank. The place looked barely livable, a few broken boards for walls, a roof patched with cloth, smoke from a small fire struggling to rise. Emily ran ahead and pushed open the door. "Mama!" she called out. Mary turned, her face pale but softening at the sight of her daughter. "Emily," she stood, weak but smiling. "Where have you been?" Emily rushed to her side and held out the bread. "I got food, Mama. We can eat tonight." Tears filled Mary's eyes as she hugged her daughter tightly. Then she noticed the man standing in the doorway. Her body stiffened. Who is that?" Samuel took off his hat respectfully. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I'm Samuel. Your daughter and I met in town. She was trying to sell this." He opened his hand, revealing the ring. Mary's face drained of color. She looked at Emily, then back at Samuel. "Oh, God," she whispered. "I told her not to." Her voice broke, and she sank back onto the chair, covering her face. Samuel stepped closer, his voice calm. "She did it because she loves you," he said. "Because she didn't want to see you hungry." Mary lowered her hands, her eyes glistening. "It's all we have left," she murmured. "It was my husband's ring. I couldn't bear to lose it." Samuel nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "And you don't have to lose it." He placed the ring gently on the table. "I didn't come here to buy your memories, ma'am. I came here to see if I could help." Mary stared at him, unsure what to say. People didn't just offer help in their world, not without wanting something back. But there was something different about this man. His voice carried honesty. His eyes carried empathy. Emily looked between them, unsure what was happening. "Mama, he's nice," she said quietly. "He gave us food." Samuel smiled at her. "She's got a strong heart," he said softly. Mary's lips trembled and she nodded. Outside, the wind had grown colder, but inside that tiny shack, something had shifted. Samuel glanced around the room, the broken stove, the damp floor, the thin blanket on the bed. He'd seen poverty before, but this felt personal now. He turned to Mary and said, "You two shouldn't be living like this." His tone was firm, not pitying. "No one should." Mary looked down, ashamed. "We don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered. "This is all we've got." Samuel looked out the window, his jaw tightening. He'd seen enough. What started as a simple act of kindness was beginning to stir something deeper in him, a decision forming quietly in his heart. Emily, still holding her mother's hand, looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes, unaware that this moment was the beginning of everything they had ever prayed for. Samuel stood in silence for a moment, taking in the scene around him. The room was dim, the air cold, and the smell of damp wood lingered. There was barely anything, no real furniture, no warmth, just two people trying to survive. Emily sat close to her mother, tearing small pieces of bread and handing them over as if each crumb was a treasure. Mary smiled weakly, her hands trembling as she took them. It broke Samuel's heart in a way he hadn't expected. He'd spent his life building fences, buying land, expanding his ranch, and chasing wealth, but none of that ever filled the quiet in his chest. Watching this mother and daughter share what little they had made him realize something he hadn't felt in a long time. Compassion that demanded action. He cleared his throat softly and both of them looked up. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, "but you can't stay here much longer. Winter's coming fast and this place won't keep the cold out." Mary looked down at her hands. "I know," she said quietly, "but it's all we have. I tried finding work in town, but no one wants to hire someone sick." Samuel nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "You're not alone anymore," he said gently. Emily tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" she asked. Samuel smiled faintly. "It means maybe it's time someone helped you for a change." He didn't say it with pity. He said it like it was a simple truth, like helping them was as natural as breathing. Mary frowned slightly. "We can't take charity, sir," she said firmly, even though her voice trembled. Samuel admired that pride, that strength she still held on to even when she had nothing. "I'm not offering charity," he said calmly. "I'm offering a chance." Mary looked up, confusion mixing with disbelief. Samuel pulled out a small piece of paper from his coat pocket. "There's a cabin," he said, "up near the ridge on my land. It's been empty for years. Needs cleaning, maybe a little fixing, but it's warm, safe, and dry. I want you and Emily to stay there." The words hung in the air, almost too heavy to believe. Mary blinked, unsure if she heard right. "Stay there," she repeated. "You mean live there?" Samuel nodded. "Yes, ma'am. For as long as you need." Emily's mouth fell open. "A cabin," she whispered, "like with a bed and a fireplace." Samuel chuckled softly. "Exactly like that." Mary's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us." Samuel looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because once, a long time ago, someone did the same for me," he said quietly, "and I never forgot it." He looked down at Emily and smiled. "And because no child should ever have to sell their mama's ring to eat." For a while, no one spoke. The fire crackled faintly in the corner, and the only sound was the wind whistling through the cracks in the wall. Mary's hands covered her face and her shoulders began to shake, not from fear this time, from relief. Emily hugged her tightly, her small voice breaking the silence. "Mama, we can have a home," she said. "A real home." Samuel stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said. "Bring a wagon, some supplies. We'll move you both before nightfall." Mary looked up, her eyes still wet. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you." Samuel shook his head. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Just promise me you'll take care of that little girl. That's all I ask." He turned and stepped out into the cool evening air. The sun had nearly set, painting the sky with deep streaks of red and gold. As he mounted his horse, he glanced back once more. Through the broken window, he could see the faint glow of the firelight and the shadow of the two figures inside, a mother and her child clinging to hope. He tipped his hat and rode away, the sound of hooves fading into the distance. That night, Emily could barely sleep. She kept turning the idea over in her mind: a cabin, warm beds, maybe even a small kitchen. She whispered to her mother in the dark. "Do you think he really means it?" she asked. Mary stroked her hair gently. "I don't know, sweetheart," she said softly, but something in his eyes, it felt honest. Emily smiled, closing her eyes. "I think he's an angel," she murmured before drifting off. The next morning, Samuel returned as promised. The sound of the wagon wheels broke the stillness of dawn. Emily ran outside, her bare feet kicking up dust. Behind the wagon, she saw sacks of flour, canned goods, blankets, and even a few toys, small wooden animals carved by hand. Samuel climbed down and smiled. "I figured you might need a few things to start with." Mary stood at the door, her hand over her mouth. She didn't know whether to cry or fall to her knees. "I can't accept all this," she said, shaking her head. "It's too much." Samuel stepped closer. "It's not too much," he said. "It's what's right." He paused, then added, "Let's get you home." They climbed into the wagon, and Samuel guided the horses along the winding trail that led up into the hills. The air grew fresher, the trees thicker, and for the first time in weeks, Mary and Emily could breathe freely. As the cabin came into view, Emily gasped. It wasn't big, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, a small wooden home surrounded by pines, smoke curling gently from a stone chimney. Samuel stopped the horses and hopped down, helping them both off. "Here it is," he said, his voice calm but proud. "It's not fancy, but it's safe." Emily ran ahead, pushing the door open. Inside, sunlight poured through clean windows, landing on a sturdy wooden table, a few chairs, and a fireplace that already had wood stacked beside it. Mary stepped inside slowly, touching the smooth wood of the wall, the solid floor under her feet. "It's perfect," she whispered. Samuel smiled. "You'll find some clothes and blankets in the trunk over there," he said. "And there's a barn out back if you ever need extra firewood. I'll come by every now and then just to make sure you've got everything you need." Mary turned toward him, her eyes filled with gratitude she couldn't express. "We don't deserve this," she said. Samuel shook his head. "Everyone deserves a chance," he replied simply. Emily ran back and hugged his leg tightly. "Thank you, mister," she said with a grin that could melt the coldest heart. Samuel smiled down at her and placed his hand gently on her head. "Take care of your mama, little one," he said. "That's the best thanks you could ever give me." As he stepped out and looked back one last time, he saw Mary standing in the doorway, tears in her eyes, and Emily beside her, waving with both hands. The sight stayed with him long after he rode away. For the first time in years, Samuel felt something he hadn't known he'd been missing: peace. The morning sun streamed through the cabin windows, and for the first time in months, Emily woke up to warmth instead of cold. The fire had burned low during the night, filling the small room with a soft orange glow. She blinked sleepily and smiled when she saw her mother still resting on the bed beside her, wrapped in a thick blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. The walls no longer creaked with the wind, and the floor didn't bite her feet with frost. It was quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but of peace. Mary stirred, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she didn't recognize where she was. Her hands brushed the blanket, the sturdy wooden bed beneath her, and then she remembered. The cabin. The man with kind eyes. Her chest filled with emotion so heavy it almost hurt. Emily jumped up, her bare feet tapping softly on the floorboards. "Mama, look, we have a real home," she said, her voice bubbling with joy. She ran to the small window, her breath fogging up the glass as she looked outside. The forest stretched out like a green ocean, sunlight filtering through the tall pine trees. Birds flitted between branches, and somewhere nearby, water trickled over stones. Emily pressed her hands against the window, whispering, "It's so beautiful." Mary smiled weakly, her heart swelling at the sight of her daughter's happiness. When they had arrived the night before, Samuel had helped them carry in the supplies, made sure the fire was started, and left a note on the table that simply read, "If you need anything, you know where to find me." He hadn't stayed long, just long enough to see them safe. But his presence lingered, like a warmth that filled every corner of the cabin. Mary stood slowly, her legs still weak from illness and exhaustion. She moved through the room, touching each thing as if afraid it might disappear. There was a sturdy table, 2 chairs, a small cupboard with dishes, and even a pot already filled with clean water. In the corner, she found a loaf of bread wrapped neatly in cloth. Emily ran to her, holding a small carved wooden horse she'd found on the windowsill. "He left toys, Mama. Look." Mary knelt, taking the toy from her daughter's hands. It was simple but carefully made, smooth and polished. "He must have made it himself," she whispered. Emily grinned. "Do you think he'll come back?" Mary hesitated, then smiled. "I think so, sweetheart, I think he will." Days passed and life slowly began to feel normal again. The cabin became more than just shelter. It became a home. Mary grew stronger each day, her color returning, her smile reappearing. She spent her mornings sweeping the wooden floor and her afternoons cooking simple meals while Emily played outside, chasing butterflies or collecting pine cones. Sometimes they would hear the distant sound of hooves, and Emily would drop whatever she was doing, running to the door. Each time Samuel appeared, riding slowly up the trail, his hat pulled low against the sun. He never stayed long, but he always brought something: flour, medicine, a warm blanket, or a few books for Emily. He never asked for anything in return. One afternoon, as he unloaded firewood from the wagon, Emily ran up to him holding the wooden horse. "Did you really make this?" she asked, her eyes shining. Samuel smiled. "I did. Used to make them for my nephew when he was little." Emily looked down at the toy thoughtfully. "It's the nicest thing anyone's ever given me," she said. Samuel paused, his throat tightening. "Then I reckon I'll have to make a few more." Mary watched from the doorway, her heart full. She still couldn't understand why this man, this stranger, had chosen to help them. But she could see the goodness in him, plain as daylight. When he looked at Emily, it was with the same tenderness a father might have. And when he spoke to Mary, it was never with pity, only quiet respect. As the days grew colder, the cabin glowed with life. Samuel showed Emily how to stack firewood properly and helped Mary mend a loose shutter. Emily followed him everywhere, asking questions about his horses, his ranch, and his life. "Do you live alone?" she asked once, her head tilted. Samuel nodded. "Yes, ma'am, been that way a long time." "Aren't you lonely?" she pressed. Samuel smiled faintly. "Not so much anymore." Sometimes, when the sun set behind the hills, Samuel would sit on the porch while Mary made tea inside. The sky would turn gold, then deep purple, and the forest would hum with crickets. Mary would bring him a cup and they'd talk quietly about simple things at first, like the weather or the crops. But slowly, their words deepened. She told him about her husband, about the accident that took him, and about how she'd been trying to hold on ever since. Samuel listened without interruption, his gaze soft but steady. "I lost someone too," he said finally. "My wife, long time ago." He looked out toward the trees. "I guess I just kept working after that. Didn't know what else to do." Mary looked at him, her eyes gentle. "And now?" she asked. He took a slow breath, the air misting slightly as he exhaled. "Now," he said quietly, "I think I finally remembered what life's supposed to feel like." Emily would often fall asleep by the fire, curled up under one of the thick blankets Samuel had brought. Mary would carry her to bed and then return to the porch, where the two adults sat in the fading light. There was no rush in their words, no awkwardness. Just peace, the kind that grows slowly, like morning light breaking through the dark. One evening, Samuel brought a surprise, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When Emily unwrapped it, she gasped. Inside was a locket with a tiny engraved flower. "It's for you," Samuel said, "so you'll always remember that kindness still exists in the world." Emily threw her arms around him, her laughter filling the air. Mary turned away for a moment, wiping her eyes. She didn't need to say anything. Samuel already knew what she felt. As the snow began to fall, the cabin became a beacon of warmth in the white silence of winter. The fireplace crackled, the smell of bread filled the air, and laughter echoed softly through the woods. The ring that had once been a symbol of desperation now rested safely in Mary's hand again, not sold, not lost, but returned with dignity. Outside, Samuel's horse waited patiently while he lingered a little longer at the doorway, his eyes meeting Mary's. The wind howled through the trees, but for once, no one inside felt afraid of the cold. They had fire, they had food, and more than anything, they had hope. The kind that grows when a stranger chooses kindness over comfort and turns an act of mercy into the start of something lasting. The snow fell thick and slow that winter, covering the hills in a quiet white blanket. The cabin sat at the edge of the woods, smoke curling gently from the chimney, a soft glow shining through the windows. Inside, Emily sat near the fire, her cheeks rosy from the heat as she carved tiny animals out of small blocks of wood. She hummed a tune her mother used to sing, her voice low and warm. Every few minutes, she'd glance toward the window as if expecting someone. Mary was at the table, sewing a patch onto a wool coat that Samuel had brought them. Her hands moved carefully, though the skin was still rough from years of hard work. She paused for a moment, staring at the fire, her thoughts far away. Life had changed so much in such a short time. There were still days when she woke up startled, thinking she was back in their old shack. But then she'd hear Emily's laughter, smell the bread baking, and remember they were safe now. They were home. It had been weeks since Samuel last visited. The snow made travel difficult, and his ranch was miles away. But even from afar, his presence lingered. Every blanket folded neatly, every jar filled with food on the shelf, every bit of warmth in their home carried his quiet care. Emily looked up suddenly when she heard the distant sound of hooves. She ran to the window, her breath fogging up the cold glass. "Mama, he's here," she said, her voice bursting with excitement. Mary smiled softly and stood, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. Outside, Samuel was tying his horse to the post, his coat dusted with snow. When he stepped onto the porch, his boots left deep prints in the white powder. Mary opened the door and the cold air swept in. "You made it," she said, her smile gentle. Samuel tipped his hat, snowflakes clinging to the brim. "Couldn't let winter pass without checking on my favorite ladies," he said. Emily giggled and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his leg. "We missed you," she said. He crouched down, brushing a bit of snow from her hair. "Missed you too, kiddo." He stepped inside, stamping his boots on the rug. The cabin smelled like fresh bread and pine. He looked around, taking in the sight, the warmth, the laughter, the life that now filled the small space. "You've done a fine job here," he said to Mary. "Feels like a real home." Mary smiled, her eyes soft. "It is," she said simply. "Because of you." Samuel shook his head. "No, ma'am, because you kept believing even when there wasn't much left to believe in." Emily brought him a wooden carving, a small horse she'd made. "This one's for you," she said proudly. "It's like your horse, see?" Samuel took it carefully, his rough hands dwarfing the tiny figure. "Looks just like him," he said with a grin. "I think I'll keep it in my pocket for luck." They sat together near the fire, sharing stories as the snow piled higher outside. Samuel told tales from his younger days on the ranch, the long rides, the storms, the nights spent under endless skies. Emily listened wide-eyed, leaning forward, completely absorbed. Mary watched quietly, her heart full. There was something in Samuel's voice, a steadiness that brought peace. As the fire crackled, Samuel noticed the old ring glinting on Mary's finger. "You kept it," he said softly. Mary looked down, turning the ring slowly between her fingers. "Yes," she whispered, "thanks to you." Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was full of understanding. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes. Samuel stood and added another log to the fire. "That should keep you warm through the night," he said. Mary nodded. "We'll be fine," she said, then hesitated. "You should stay at least until the snow slows down. The roads are too dangerous." Samuel looked toward the door, then back at her. "You sure you don't mind the company?" Mary shook her head, smiling faintly. "Not one bit." He took off his coat and hung it by the door. Emily clapped her hands. "Can we make stew, Mama, please?" Mary laughed. "All right," she said, "but you'll help." Samuel chuckled and rolled up his sleeves. "Guess I'm on potato duty," he said. They worked together in the small kitchen, the firelight dancing across their faces. The cabin filled with the sound of laughter, spoons clinking, and the rich smell of food simmering. It felt like a family, not one bound by blood but by something deeper. Later that night, after Emily had fallen asleep by the fire, Mary poured Samuel a cup of tea. They sat in the quiet glow, the snow still whispering outside. "I don't know how to thank you," Mary said softly. Samuel looked into the fire, his voice low. "You already have," he said. "Every time I come here, I see what hope looks like again." Mary's gaze lingered on him. "You've done more for us than anyone ever has. You gave us our lives back." Samuel shook his head. "You did that yourself. I just gave you a little push." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "You know, I used to think wealth was about what you own, but now I think it's about what you give." The words hung in the air, simple but true. Mary smiled, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Then you're the richest man I've ever met." Samuel laughed softly, the sound warm and real. "Maybe I am," he said. The hours slipped by and the fire burned low. Samuel leaned back, watching the flames dance. Mary sat quietly beside him, her hand resting near his on the armrest. Neither of them moved. There was no need for words. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the moonlight spilled across the frozen world, soft and silver. When dawn came, Samuel prepared to leave. Emily woke up just in time to hug him tightly around the waist. "You'll come back, right?" she asked, her voice small. Samuel smiled and tilted her chin up. "You couldn't keep me away if you tried." Mary stood at the doorway, the morning light touching her face. "Be safe out there," she said. Samuel nodded. "You too," he replied. As he rode away, the sound of his horse faded into the quiet hills. Mary and Emily stood watching until he disappeared into the trees. The cabin stood strong behind them, smoke rising steadily, a symbol of everything they had regained: safety, love, and the kindness of one good man who had chosen to care when no one else would. The snow glittered under the morning sun, and Emily slipped her hand into her mother's. Neither spoke, but both knew their lives had changed forever. The world had given them back more than shelter. It had given them hope, the kind that never fades, no matter how cold the winter might be.